Let's go to Canberra now. Joining us live is our panel on a Monday morning, Liberal Senator Holly Hughes, the Assistant Defence Minister Matt Thistlethwaite here as well. Good morning to you both. First of all, we'll start off with Barnaby Joyce.
Mate.
He's spoken about that incident earlier today. For those who haven't seen it yet, this was his excuse for it.
I made a big mistake. There's no excuse for it. There's a reason. And, it's a very eventful walk home, wasn't it? So anyway, that's... I should have followed I'm on a prescription drug, and they say certain things may happen to you if you drink, and they were absolutely 100% right. They did.
All right, Matt, we'll start with you. He's obviously embarrassed about it, but it's hardly a hanging offence, is it?
Well, I think the first thing is you're concerned for the welfare of the individual, and Barnaby's explained the situation. In effect, he's apologised. I accept that apology. I think we've all got standards that the public expect of us as public officials. I think Barnaby's probably admitted that he didn't reach that standard. He's apologised. I don't think it's going to go much further. My focus here is making sure that we deliver tax cuts for people and new IR laws. I think we should, concentrate on the policy issues.
All right, yep. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Holly, as a coalition colleague, are you satisfied with Barnaby's response this morning?
Look, I think Barnaby has given the fact that he was on prescription medication, and he doesn't deny that he'd had a couple of drinks. So I don't think he's trying to obfuscate here. But I think it says a really sad thing about our society, that rather than assist someone thinks it's more appropriate to film them and try and sell that footage. It's just, it's so tacky and grubby. And look, the whole fact that, if anyone thinks that they are above reproach in all forms and have never done anything wrong, well, good on them.
No, look, I agree with you, Holly.
I don't think there's many of us that live to that standard.
But on that point, I know that's been said, but I mean, Barnaby he's a high-profile member of the public. I mean, that's just the world we live in. People are going to do that and make a buck.
Well, I think it says more about them than it does about anybody else, and I'd certainly be horrified if it was my children that decided that was the more appropriate way to behave rather than actually going to someone's assistance.
Okay, Matt, on to IR and the right to disconnect. How many workers do you expect this policy would actually apply to?
I think it'll apply to thousands of workers. And we know that increasingly, Pete, people are required to connect after hours, particularly through emails and other forms of social media. And I think that many Australian workers have said, well, it's got out of hand recently. And what we're trying to do here is make sure that people have a reasonable result and a reasonable right to disconnect when they're not at work. So I use the example of if someone's on a Sunday off, it's their kid's birthday party, and the boss sends them an email demanding that they get onto it quickly, I think that person should have the right to say, hey, I'm at my kid's birthday party, I'll get onto it tomorrow. We're just trying to enshrine that in legislation to give people that right to say, I'm not at work, I'm not being paid.
Why do you need that to be in legislation, though? I mean, obviously it's a Greens edition. It just seems like a strange policy to rubber stamp because, if you start screening the boss, you're not going to get very far.
You need it in legislation, Pete, because the distinction about when people are at work and when people are on family time and at home has become so blurred over the last decade because of the ability of the boss to connect with their workers, particularly when they're off or at home.
But that's running a business. A boss has got to connect with workers.
Yeah, and what we're saying is it should be reasonable. And that's what the legislation says. It should be reasonable that a person has the opportunity to disconnect and to spend time with their family, particularly on weekends and particularly on special occasions like kids' birthdays and other things, without being asked to immediately get onto a particular task. And we're just saying that that's a reasonable option that people should have.
Is that reasonable,
Pete,
Holly?
this is... No, it's not. And the thing about this is the government is now running for cover because in their haste to get through their IR legislation last week, they agreed to a Greens amendment that could potentially jail employers for allegedly contacting their staff outside of what they define as reasonable, which unfortunately I don't think is defined for a start. So there's problem number one. But the problem that this will have, and, you know, there's always these unintended consequences, and that's why we have Senate inquiries. That's why we look at legislation closely. Don't just ram stuff through, let alone major changes to our industrial relations laws, particularly not at the behest of the unicorn farmers down the end of the chamber. But it is just insane that this was allowed to be pushed through. Tony Burke pushing it through the Senate to get it because he just happened to get Pocock and Thorpe on board. It's absolutely disgraceful legislation. But for those people that go to work today and think, oh, hang on, I've just got to duck out at 2 o'clock because I've got a dentist appointment, or I've got to leave early today because it's parent-teacher interviews, well, that flexibility might not be available anymore because it's a two-way street here. It is the employers that provide the positions. And if the employer cannot get the job done that their business needs done to operate, well, that flexibility that so many workers rely on may no longer be able to exist.
Matt, it's an overreach, the jail time, surely.
Well, we tried to move an amendment to that, to take that out in the process last week. But
oops, too late, because we've already passed it. Oops, we didn't really read what the Greens put forward.
We tried to move the amendment, Pete, and the opposition wouldn't grant leave to move the amendment.
Mate, so we're not here. We are not here when you ram through into our industrial relations change to fix your mistakes.
So it will be fixed this week. The reason why that is still in the legislation is
attention to detail. It's our fault.
The opposition.
It's our fault you didn't read the Greens amendment. It's our fault you didn't read the Greens amendment. Nice try.
Matt, we're out of time. Can you give me 30 seconds on this on these delays between Defence and the bureaucrats, the top bureaucrats at Defence now? Since you've been in power, it's been blown out by another 5 years. How's that good for our national security?
So in the wake of COVID, the previous government invested heavily in some stimulus programs across the board, across the economy. But a lot of those were in defence. And they're big multi-billion-dollar investments. But the problem with a lot of them was there was the capital outlay up front, but no sustainment funding. So there were a couple of big information communications technology investments where the capital funding was provided up front, but no sustainment funding for the next 10 years. Okay. In the case of the Hunter-class frigates, a massive multi-billion-dollar investment in new technology, and there are now question marks about whether or not that technology can be delivered. The Australian National Audit Office was quite scathing of that particular project. Surely the Australian taxpayers expect us as a new government to look at those projects and say whether or not they are sustainable into the future and whether or not they need reform.
Over 12 months for a short, sharp review into the strategic surface fleet.
When we're talking about an area where we spend $50 billion a year, it's only reasonable that we cast a look over those projects.
Got to wrap. Matt and Holly, though. Appreciate it as always.